Welcome to the Politics and Media programme. From at least the moment when, as a minister in Edward Heath's Tory government of the early 1970s, she became known as Maggie Thatcher the Milk Snatcher, the late Tory leader was a divisive figure. Much greater controversy followed as she cut a swathe through British society in 3 successive terms as Prime Minister. In death, as in life, she has remained an object of adoration for some and the subject of detestation for many. Here's more.
Margaret Thatcher didn't just lead our country, she saved our country.
Margaret Thatcher, a Prime Minister who managed to polarise a nation, both in life and in death. She died last week, aged 87, following a stroke. Baroness Thatcher governed Britain from 1979 to 1990. Nicknamed the Iron Lady, she was driven and uncompromising. Her policies were controversial. She deregulated the financial sector, brought about the privatisation of public companies, and famously declared that there is no such thing as society.
The changes Margaret Thatcher made to the United Kingdom were immensely positive. She transformed society for the good, and she's helped people, whether they are from the working poor or they are unemployed or successful and entrepreneurial. I think fundamentally most Muslims and Asians or Hindus or Sikhs think of Margaret Thatcher's values as resonating with our own. I mean, after all, she comes from a small, hard-working family where she was taught an ethos that if you work and study hard, you can do well. Now, I'm sure if you go to the mainstream, Asian community or in the African and African Caribbean community, these are the kinds of principles and ethos that are given to us from an early age. You're much, much more now able to succeed as a black or Asian businessman or within the large corporations, and I think that flows from her quite progressive policies.
Thatcher is to be given a state funeral on Wednesday, and tributes have poured in from the public. David Cameron recalled MPs from their Easter recess to pay tribute to Baroness Thatcher here at Westminster. Labour leader Ed Miliband called for respect from politicians, regardless of their opinions on Thatcher's policies. But not everyone on the left of the political spectrum has been subdued over her death. In Brixton, people were playing to a different tune. Celebratory parties took place in the borough, where 32 years earlier, under Thatcher's government, there had been heavy rioting due to high unemployment and racial tensions. For these people, Thatcher's name is synonymous with devastated communities.
That woman made my youth a misery. I think that she was to blame for most of the ills in society.
Everything she stood for, I'm opposed to. And I'm proud to be with people that come out here and say, I am celebrating, yeah.
Maggie, Maggie, Maggie!
Thatcher rearranged the British political landscape. Under her, 150 coal mines were closed, leading to fierce riots in the north of England. She also introduced the poll tax, which proved to be one of the most unpopular taxes of a generation.
I'm not one to celebrate someone's passing away, but that there is understandable strong sentiments against Margaret Thatcher up and down the country. I can well remember as a school kid watching her on TV and making her views clear about immigration when she said, she used the word swamp in connection to immigration. I got a very distinct message about that. And it's lived with me ever since. And it wasn't surprising that after the events of 9/11, she made not dissimilar comments that Muslim priests should be telling Muslims to sort themselves out. As we know how badly misguided that is, and I'm not sure I'll be going upstairs at City Hall and the Mayor's office to sign the condolence book.
Margaret Thatcher refused to put her signature to the boycott pledge of South Africa during apartheid, and she denounced Nelson Mandela as a terrorist. Was she an unabashedly racist woman, as she was described last week, or simply a product of her time? While opinion remains divided over the impact of Thatcher's legacy on Britain's Muslim community, it's clear that her death will not see politicians waving goodbye to Thatcherism the idea just yet. Charlotte Hawkins, Islam Channel.
With me in the studio are Omar Faruk from the Conservative Muslim Forum and Baroness Pola Uddin, who was the first UK Muslim peer. But we'd start with, we're joined by Sir Iqbal Sacranie on the phone. He's the former Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. Welcome to the programme, everybody. Sir Iqbal, if I could bring you in first, what's your view of Margaret Thatcher's legacy?
Well, I think there's no question she was a remarkable lady. And there are areas where one could clearly identify which really concerns us in terms of the way the whole society was polarized during her time. And I think your report very clearly outlined a number of areas. But if I would pick up those 2 or 3 key areas that deeply concerned me over the period of time, one was, of course, the death of the manufacturing industry, the way she actually handled, and there were the few industries that were sort of flourishing at that time. There was hardly any support, and today we don't see any of that in place. The second was, of course, the whole mining industry and the trade union movement. These were the, if you could use this as a working class people, or lower down the ladder, who were not really given the opportunity and were treated as simply as protesters, as radicals, and perhaps, somehow that they had no place in the society and they had to be silenced. So that freedom to express their views that was so essential, I think, was curtailed at a quite a big way. And thirdly, I think on the international front, what really concerned me most was the sanctions against South Africa. At that time, the world opinion was moving so fast in terms of issues of racism, discrimination, and here we had a very powerful leader from the West who was not able to support that move to show that that is not acceptable. So these were the 3 key areas which I felt deeply concerned. But looking at the other 2 or 3 matters, the human side of it, the family values she promoted was something that was very much akin to what as Muslims and people of faith believe in. And the institution of marriage, very strongly supported, something she quite strongly resonated with the community. And of course, the entrepreneurship, the deregulation, both in the financial industry, the privatization, which I thought those were the important areas that really brought the growth within the economy. But this, leaving that aside, one experience I had, John, which I vividly remember, over the number of years I've met her a number of times at receptions and functions, whatever. But it was in 1978, or I think just early part of 79, when she was the leader of the opposition. And I accompanied the delegation led by Dr. Pasha, the General Secretary of the UMO. And at that meeting, she was accompanied by Sir Ian Percival, the former Attorney General, and Bernard Weatherall, who was the Deputy Speaker at the time, and then, of course, later on, Lord Weatherall. These were the 2 major interlocutors of the Muslim community at that time. And in that meeting, I think this was perhaps one of the first meetings we've had with a senior politician at that time, the issues of, the family, Muslim family law, the Bill of Rights, the faith schools, and the halal food was raised by Dr. Pasha and the delegation. There were basically 4 of us. And I could see the very positive remarks she had about the Muslim community in Islam generally, in terms of the family values that we shared, the entrepreneurship that existed, and could not see that abrupt behavior sometimes that we see of her being shown in some of the images. Okay,
I'm going to have to bring some of the studio guests in now. Thank you very much for those personal and political reminiscences. Omar, Faruk, are you surprised at the sort of divided public reaction to majority of people in the polls, for instance, are opposed to the expenditure on the funeral?
Firstly, I wanted to say that I, as a child, I remember growing up when Margaret Thatcher was the leader of our country. And she is a person whom and I think many people can identify with, given that many of us come from working class backgrounds. She came from a working class background. She had to go sort of fight against many obstacles. So I think as Muslims, as people of the minority ethnic communities, that sort of background, they can understand that the hard slog this lady had to go through to get to where she is. In terms of her impact in England and internationally, she was a powerful figure. She was an immense leader. Hence, That's why she's been given the funeral that she actually didn't ask for, but it's the country as a whole which is giving her this funeral because she is one of our greatest leaders of this country.
Baroness Uddin, I mean, Omar says he came from a working class background, actually a lower middle class background, but it's easier to rise if you marry into the family of somebody who's at the head of one of the biggest corporations in the country, isn't it?
I think I'll answer it in a minute if you'll just allow me to, first of all, pay my condolences to her family and those of us who are in public life very publicly know that it must be incredibly difficult for her family to go through these very divided set of opinions that they are now facing, as well as their mother's death. So I want to sort of say that, first of all. The next thing I want to say is that as a woman, my sort of politically formative years were entirely set against her politics. I came into politics, at a time when we were robustly defending our communities, our services against many of the policies that her government, not she alone, but her leadership and her cabinet inflicted on many communities, including in the East End of London. And I think that the fact that I have very sort of two different aspects to my experience with her. So having opposed all of the things she stood for so many decades, it seemed. I know that it wasn't, I think it was a couple of decades, including the poll tax, including the anti-apartheid movements. I used to go and take my children, stand against on the Trafalgar Square. And I remember all those memories. Very interesting to actually reflect on some of the memories to do with, Baroness Thatcher being in government. And then in 98, when I went into the House of Lords, suddenly there she was, right opposite me. And I'd always wanted to say so many things, just like Sir Iqbal. I had met her on numerous occasions in events and all of that, but never having the opportunity of wanting to say anything. But it was a remarkable change of heart on my part, I have to say. When I actually saw her, she looked just like an ordinary woman, just as I was in the House of Lords sitting on the... And she used to stare at me, and I often used to think that, is she saying, what am I doing here? Because of some of the experiences of her politics, anti-immigration politics and all of that. And I'd never thought that she was racist. I have to be very, very honest at that time. It was purely politics for me. And then one day I'd worn this very blue salwar kameez. It was really bright blue. And for some oddest sort of reason, she came up to me afterwards as we were both leaving the chamber. She said, I love your blue. And anyway, so we got talking, and I told her, I said to her that, do you know, it's so strange. I'd been wanting to tell you how much I resented everything that you stood for. But I just thought, okay, you're just a woman here as far as I'm concerned. And I also have to just reflect that later on, over the years, whenever there were massive numbers of women who would come, I often hosted lots of women. And if they saw her, or if I was in the tea room and I was with one or two women who wanted to be introduced, not once did she flinch an eyelid in actually going to talk to those women. And so on a human level, I saw an entirely different character of a woman to the one that I had sort of opposed politically all of the time. And I think politically we should come back later on in the discussion about why those reasons so much stood out. And I think that it is true that, there was such a division in society, and under her leadership, under her cabinet leadership, under her government leadership, I think we did have a very long-lasting divided country. I
mean, Omar, on that question, I mean, there was it was referred to in the package at the beginning, the swamping speech. It was something that brought the language that previously be on the fringe of the right wing of the Tory party into the centre of the Tory party. And her comments in 2001 that I don't wish to have what they call a multicultural society. I hate these phrases, multicultural society. A multicultural society will never be a united society. I mean, those aren't sentiments with which very many people who are in minority communities in this country would find very much sympathy.
I think what Baroness Uddin said in terms of Margaret Thatcher as a person and policies and perceptions, it could be said that sometimes politicians cannot articulate themselves as well as they can and carry everybody in society. What is certain is Margaret Thatcher was an eminent leader. She pursued policies that she believed in with full conviction. She was not a racist. She was a hard-working person who came from a humble background. And in fact, if one looks at the civil service or the public sector, because she was not from an Oxbridge background, a grocer's daughter.
She wasn't.
Well, what I mean,
graduate.
She was graduate, but in the sense that, in terms of what I meant by Oxbridge, her family, her father, and so forth, in that sense, she wasn't. When she came into government, and especially in terms of the civil service and other places, what is unknown and really not said is she actually brought diversity into the civil service, but by not appointing those who may have come from traditional backgrounds where generations of their family had gone to Oxbridge and so forth. So she broke that down, and that's one of the things I think people forget about her.
I do disagree with my younger brother Omar on number of points. Mainly what you said about that her inability to express her views, perhaps inadequately. It's not true. She expressed those views because she really believed in them, and that's one thing that was quite made clear about some of the sort of comments. I mean, I sat through 3-4 hours of contribution in the House of Lords about those who were very, very close to her, and what they say is that there was no diversity in that sense, that she really believed those who she appointed and she worked with were of her own caliber, in that sense, that there was no diversity in terms of, men and women and people of color, people of faith, and she really did not believe in those things. And it was well out of her politics range. So I'm not at all surprised she said she doesn't believe in multiculturalism, because it goes very well with the fact she said she didn't believe in society. It was all about individuals and advancing individual rights and individual freedom and individual place in a society.
I respect very much Baroness Uddin and see her as an older sister coming from the same community. But what Margaret Thatcher did believe in was meritocracy. If somebody was very good, and Baroness Uddin is absolutely correct when she says that she wanted people of her own caliber, in the sense that she wanted people, regardless of what sort of background they came from, as long as they could deliver, as long as they could do their job, as long as they can perform. So in that sense, that's what she wanted. She wanted a society based on meritocracy.
But not to say that those
and
other communities didn't possess those.
No,
caliber,
absolutely.
Yeah. There was no place for them in
every society possesses those characteristics, and very much so. Baroness Uddin is correct when Margaret Thatcher, yes, she very much believed in entrepreneurialism, and I personally believe, and many people believe, that because of Margaret Thatcher's policies and opening up entrepreneurship and so forth, many people from our own communities, by own communities I mean communities who, from black and minority ethnic communities, they've succeeded in the private sector, in public sector, in government, because of the policies that she began. Yes, there are some policies, the poll tax and others, and unions that she took on, which not everybody agrees with. But even picking up on the issue of immigration, I myself am born and brought up here. I do believe immigration has to be balanced, has to be restricted in a way that it doesn't have an adverse impact on the
that's
public sector and
then from
so forth. So that doesn't make one a racist. And what I'm saying is Margaret Thatcher in no way was a racist. She believed in her convictions and she pursued them for the betterment of the country. And she did, in fact, make Britain very, very great. And she was respected across the world as a very effective leader. And we should be proud of that fact as Britons.
I was just going to say that, I think that rehashing the same argument won't make it go away. Those things that Baroness Thatcher had said made a remarkable impact on communities. So if she had, because she was a conviction politician, so if she said something so strong as saying that it would swamp Britain or whatever, it would reverberate in the communities. It would send out a signal of saying that this country is closed and all of that. But I do want to say that she comes from a different generation of politics, where politics was different, where there wasn't, enough issues made around inclusion and diversity and all of the things that we've now kind of got used to. So, sorry, you wanted to...
Well, it's just to go back to this issue. I mean, the apartheid system in South Africa is commonly acknowledged to be a racist system.
Yes.
And she was a supporter of it. Now, there's a question mark there, isn't there?
Indeed. And I mean, she was a product of her time. She grew up in a context, in a historical context, in a cultural context, and so forth. But we need to sort of move away beyond
we all lived
the
through
point.
those times, and it's not.
Yes.
If we were all prisoners of the times, we would have all supported it. But very, very many people in this country, a majority of people in this country, did not.
John, when we look at a leader, and what we seem to be discussing in this program, and I don't mean it as a criticism, and I say from the Muslim community, we need to look at the positive things that a person has achieved. They've passed away, the positive things they've achieved. There will be minor points on which we will disagree. Like Baroness Uddin said, she was from another generation, and generations have different opinions. What we also need to do is condemn the sort of celebratory things that people are doing, getting drunk and celebrating someone's death, or promoting through the charts a song because someone has died. All of these things, these are inappropriate. And I think we need to concentrate our mind on the achievements of this lady rather than taking away one or two things that she may not have got right at that time.
I think that if we look at through the prism of today's existence as a multiracial society and multi-faith society, I think she would have been deeply uncomfortable with all of that. But then I think, what if she had grown up in today's environment? Maybe she would have been very articulate about diversity and all of that. I don't know. I mean, who knows? I've been hearing a number of contributions, including, Shirley Williams, and she says that, she was a product of that time, except so am I, and I didn't used to think like that. So I would ask people to judge, that sort of politics about Margaret Thatcher, Baroness Thatcher, in the context that she was. And I think that we have to take it for what she said, because if we say that she was a conviction politician, then she must have had those convictions. She would have researched thoroughly. She would have understood. She read her brief very well. I just wanted to share a couple of points about the South African issue.
Moving towards the end of the program.
Yeah, just that South African issue. A number of people have made the point in the House of Lords and House of Commons about why she would have held such views about South Africa. Apparently, it is said that just like she marked out Gorbachev as someone that she could do business with, and Russia should, sort of that leadership could come from him. Apparently, she also identified de Klerk as someone like that, and that would have been one of her reasons why she wanted to work with.
We'll have to leave it there. That's all we've got time for on the times of Margaret Thatcher, but no doubt we'll be returning at least to her legacy in future editions of the Politics and Media programme. But do rejoin us for the second part of this week's programme.